All right, see the numbers keep going up, but we'll go ahead and get started to be mindful of everyone's time. So welcome to ACWD's first landscape workshop of spring 2022. Thanks for joining us this evening. For our workshop today, we'll be highlighting ACWD's Lombi Gone rebate program, and then talking about water-wise landscaping, which is a topic that's more timely than ever with the continued drought that we're experiencing statewide here in California. So thanks again for joining us for this workshop that's being hosted in partnership with Alameda County Water District and the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, or BOSCA. So first, we'll just go over some Zoom logistics. So all attendees are muted by default, but we do encourage you to ask your questions as they come up during the webinar. If you do have questions, please make sure to put them in the Q&A chat box as they come up, and then we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A session so that we can address your questions then. And this webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards. So we'll send a follow-up email to all of those of you who registered with the link to the recording once that recording is available. So first, I just wanted to highlight some information regarding drought and what ACWD has done in response to drought. So as you may have heard, the state of California is experiencing a severe drought. And because of continued dry conditions and constraints on ACWD's water supplies, the district did adopt an ordinance declaring a water shortage emergency and adopting water use regulations, restrictions, and guidelines in December of 2021. And this ordinance aims to conserve the district's water supply by minimizing landscape irrigation while maintaining landscape viability, minimizing water waste, and restricting other non-essential uses. So on the screen, you can see some graphics that highlight the outdoor water use practices that are prohibited and accepted under the ordinance. So for example, runoff from irrigation is prohibited. Using hoses without quick acting positive shutoff nozzles is prohibited, and hosing off sidewalks, driveways, and other hardscapes is prohibited. And we have a number of outdoor water use practices that are accepted under the ordinance. So for example, irrigating with drip or subsurface irrigation is okay. Irrigating trees that are on a separate valve or irrigated with bubblers is accepted. We really encourage our customers to prioritize irrigation for their trees so that they can survive through the continued drought conditions because of the multiple benefits that trees provide our community. So those are some examples of outdoor water uses that are prohibited in our ordinance. A big part of the ordinance has to do with irrigation days that are allowed per week. So we do have restrictions for the number of days that our customers can irrigate per week using their sprinkler system. And this schedule really applies to over the surface irrigation like sprinklers and rotors. It does not apply to subsurface irrigation like drip irrigation. So as you can see on the schedule of the graphic that's on the screen, during the month of May, only one watering day per week is allowed, and that will increase to 2 watering days per week in June through September for the summer months. And you can find a copy of our ordinance and more details about the restrictions, regulations, and guidelines at our website at acwd.org/WSE ordinance. So other announcements, stay tuned for ACWD's next landscape workshop that's happening later this spring, likely in late May, early June. And we'll make sure to advertise that and send you information about that so that you can sign up if you're interested. So now I just wanted to provide some other background about Alameda County Water District. So it's the mission of Alameda County Water District to provide a reliable supply of high quality water at a reasonable price to our customers. The district was founded in 1914, and we serve the cities of Fremont, Newark, and Union City. We serve about 357,000 customers and have over 84,000 connections. And our typical water supply sources include imported water from the State Water Project and the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission Hetch Hetchy system, as well as local water from our Alameda Creek watershed. And I also wanted to highlight some of the water conservation programs that we offer our residential customers. And those include free water conservation kits that you can order that include low flow shower heads, faucet aerators, and toilet leak detection dye tablets. We have our turf replacement rebate program that I'll be highlighting in the next couple of slides. And we offer rain barrel rebates, a smart sprinkler controller instant rebate, and irrigation hardware rebates if you want to upgrade your sprinklers if you find that they're leaking as you're checking them. As the summer months are coming and you're doing those irrigation system checks and you find some sprinkler heads that are leaking, we have a irrigation hardware rebate that you can take advantage of. Now I wanted to highlight our Lombi Gone rebate program, which is one of our most popular rebate programs. So we offer our customers $2 per square foot of lawn that they remove and replace with water efficient landscaping. And for our single family residential customers, the maximum is $3,000 for the rebate, so up to 1,500 square feet. And this program just recently transitioned to an online application. So this slide here outlines the steps for filling out the application, what is needed, and how to get approval. So the rebate is based off of the area of lawn. So you'll start off by determining the amount of lawn that you want to replace. Then you'll submit the online application, which asks for basic information, address, name, account number. You'll submit photos of what your current lawn looks like and a project plan, and then a list of low water use plants that you're planning to install in your yard. Then once you submit the application, our water use efficiency team will review it. And if everything looks good and you're meeting the program terms and conditions, we'll issue you a notice to proceed, and you can go ahead and complete your project. So once you complete your project, you'll go ahead and submit photos of what your new water efficient landscaping looks like, receipts for all the landscaping materials that you purchased and used in your project, a list of the final low water use plants that you installed, and a completed W-9 form. And then once we review all the post conversion materials that you submitted to us and everything looks good, you will receive your rebate check via mail. So this slide here highlights some of the program requirements. So only low water use plants from an approved plant list qualify, and you can find that plant list on our website. And sprinklers must be capped or removed. The rebate does not require that you have an irrigation, but if you do choose to install irrigation, it must be drip irrigation. At least 50% of the converted area of your yard must be covered in low water use plants once they reach full maturity. And any hardscape that you install must be permeable, so water must be able to go through. And you can find resources to help you out with your lawn conversion project on our website. For example, we have links to garden designs, plant lists, and FAQs. And you can find those at acwd.org/rebates, which is where you can also go to fill out the online application. So now I just wanted to provide some information about BOSCA, who we are partnering with to host this landscape workshop today. So BOSCA represents 26 agencies that include cities, water districts, and universities that purchase water wholesale from the San Francisco Regional Water System. And BOSCA member agencies provide water to 1.8 million people and over 40,000 businesses and community organizations in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. And BOSCA's goal is to provide a high quality supply of water at a fair price. Here are some other upcoming webinars that BOSCA is hosting. And if any of these topics are of interest of you, feel free to register and attend. And you can do so by visiting bayareaconservation.org. So now I wanted to talk about our landscape workshop today. This workshop today really tackles water efficient landscaping, water-wise landscaping. So it really focuses on outdoor water use, which represents a great opportunity for conservation in the Bay Area. And outdoor water use reduction through the use of water efficient plants and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that future water supply needs of our communities continue to be met. So very timely and important topic. And now just a quick disclaimer, please note this presentation is general in nature, is not intended to be an exhaustive review of the subject matter. The information contained in this presentation does not reflect the policies of ACWD, BOSCA, or its other member agencies, and the presentation, instructor information, products, and materials are provided as a courtesy to participants and are not endorsed by ACWD, BOSCA, or its other member agencies. So now if you have questions about any of the water conservation programs that I listed or about the ordinance that ACWD passed and the water use restrictions that are in place, please feel free to contact our water use efficiency team at the phone number or email on the screen, and we'll be happy to answer your questions and concerns to the best of our ability. And now, without further ado, I will introduce our wonderful instructor for today's landscape workshop, Ms. Juanita Salisbury. Ms. Juanita Salisbury has a PhD in biopsychology from the University of Florida. She has a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture from West Virginia University. In 2009, she established Juanita Salisbury Landscape Architecture after working for several commercial and residential design firms. And she recently turned her focus to California native plant pollinator habitats. In 2016, she established Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, the first of 5 pollinator habitat gardens in Palo Alto. And her focus is to research and relay information on these habitats and explore opportunities to install more of these gardens. So we have a great instructor with us here today with a lot of great experience, expertise, and knowledge, and we're very lucky to have her. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Juanita.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, let me pull my talk up. I need to get control. You're gonna make me a co-host there? Okay, very good. Let me try that again.
Try it now.
Okay, there we go. All right. Here we go. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I do have a PhD in biopsychology and a degree in landscape architecture. And I just want to give you a general idea about my sort of focus from these different backgrounds. When I was in psychology, I studied the biopsychology of eating and drinking, ingestive behavior. And now for landscape architecture, I really focus on native plant habitat and restoration. So I combine both areas of expertise, and you'll see that it's quite related, actually. And we did start back in 2016, the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I'm always out taking a lot of macro photography of various insects that we have in the gardens to just keep tabs on everything and make sure that things are working the way they're supposed to. We also have a YouTube channel, Primrose Way. If you want to see these plants in action in Palo Alto, we have 5 here. The Primrose Garden, this is Embarcadero Road. If you get off 101 at Embarcadero and head west, the Primrose Way Garden is the first one that we did, but we have others. So the Island Drive Pollinator Garden, Arcadia Place, Hopkins Avenue, and then the Gwynda Street Pollinator Garden. And we're connecting these 2 gardens via a corridor, and this project is currently underway. Gardens are always open. Most of the plants are labeled, so you can see what these things look like in their natural setting outside in the ground, and see how big some get, and maybe come back several times over the year to see what they look like in the spring versus midsummer versus late summer and then winter, to get a sense of what you might like to use in your own garden. So tonight's talk is going to be broad concepts. If I get too specific, it's not going to work for everybody. If there's very specific examples, it's not a one size fits all, but I think broad concepts are more easily built upon, that you can then take those and apply them to your own specific situation. I'm first going to talk about how form follows function. Then we're going to get rid of our lawn and talk about lawn alternatives. We're going to talk about trees and native plants, and then everybody's favorite thing, maintenance, how to take care of these things. And I try to liven up the slides with lots of pictures of really cool looking insects that we see, or the, well, as I like to call them, the magnificent beasts of Palo Alto. So jumping right into form follows function, one of the questions that you need to ask yourself even before you start is, how are you going to use your area outside? Consider those places where you're going to walk, where you're going to sit, where you're playing, where you want to plant things, and so forth. Consider if you need a lawn for those functions. So once you think about how you're going to use your outside space, then leverage that in terms of making decisions. So leverage your function-based decision-making to optimize how you're going to use water outside. As was mentioned earlier, outdoor irrigation accounts for most of a home's water use. Lawns, those greedy things, can use up to 50% of outdoor water. So consider your function when deciding whether or not to have a lawn. What are they used for? Also, we know that mowing increases weeds and pests. There was a study done in 2019. So, consider if you're out having outdoor spaces where people gather, where people can walk. Think of other ways that you can have those spaces without necessarily having a lawn. So one of the things that I've done in the past is design irrigation systems for clients. And so this is a couple of things here where I have outdoor irrigation accounts for most of a home's water use. So up here, this top graph is a kind of a generic brand new 3-bedroom house showing various fixtures and how much water is used. This is indoors, okay? So generally about 46,521 gallons per year. So that's kind of the general. So I was like, then I did a water budget calculation for a client that I throw up here to kind of show you the various methods and just the results of figuring out how much each valve can use for watering plants. And the main takeaway here is that we have a couple of lawn areas. This first one, zone 2, is a lawn, and then we have zone 7. These are both lawn areas. And the outdoor irrigation that we have here, all total, for the year, and it was a large property, it was probably about a 13,000 square foot property, was 63,319 gallons of water a year. That's more than the inside was using. So that's a lot. And if you think that an average home is using about 46,000 gallons, there's going to be some obvious places where you can really reduce the amount of water use. And the lawn here is using about 45% of the total irrigation outside, but is only 19% of the landscape area. So really big water use for the lawns. So if we got rid of the lawn, we could cut out almost 29,000 gallons of water from the outdoor irrigation, which would then put it more comparable to what people are using on the interior. So let's get rid of our lawns, shall we? So one of the easier ways to get rid of your lawn is to sheet mulch. And that basically means to take sheets of cardboard, slap them down right on top of the lawn. I mean, you can mow it down first. It's nice and short, really no need to. Slap it down, then layer it up with compost, mulch, and other things like that. This is in my own backyard. I created a planting bed in our lawn, which I let die completely. And because I just stopped watering it. And I was creating a small vegetable bed, thinking this was at the beginning of the pandemic, I would need to grow some tomatoes for food. That didn't necessarily need to happen, but it's pretty easy to do. You take your old cardboard boxes, you wet them down, slap them down onto the lawn, layer them up, and you can plant right through them. So that's one easy way to get rid of lawn. And there are some resources that kind of go through the intricacies of sheet mulching. There's this Lawn to Garden website here that just goes through the whole process overview, which I'm not going to go through, but you guys can take a look at it. It tells you how to sheet mulch and maintain things. So that's a resource that's available, pretty easy to get through this process with this site. Even more from the stopwaste.org people, you don't want to kill your lawn first or dig it up. No need to do that, because if the lawn dies under the cardboard, you're adding valuable nutrients to the ground. And you can see that there's layers of compost and mulch on top of cardboard, which smothers the grass. Topsoil's retained, grass decomposes, beneficial soil organisms chomp on the organic material, everybody's happy. So yet another resource if you want to go the sheet mulching method. Now, mulch is a great thing to use. I always find that a really nice mulch after sheet mulching just makes everything look so nice and tidy. And this is a nice, gives you a kind of a clean slate kind of look, and it just covers that bare ground, and it looks wonderful. And so this is a nice mini bark mulch that you can put down, and you can walk on it. You can plant through those cardboard barriers. You just pull the mulch back, make a hole in the cardboard, and you can dig a hole and plant right in there. You're good to go. It just looks good. It's just, people don't like something looking untidy. I always say mulch covers a multitude of sins. If you don't want to create a mulched area or a planted area, some other options. Remember, we're talking about function. If you're looking for places where people can congregate outside and you don't want to water the lawn anymore, you can get rid of it and put down something that's permeable, like decomposed granite, which is basically crushed granite. And it can look really great. Here's a client's house that we did. We added some stepping stones throughout the area, so that if they wanted to walk barefoot on the in the area, they would have nice smooth surface to walk on, just kind of nice and neat and clean. You can plant in decomposed granite, and it's permeable, so that's another option that can be very functional as well as nice and tidy looking. So if you're looking for a place to walk, you don't want to walk on mulch, you don't want to walk on decomposed granite, you want to be barefoot, and you can't be barefoot in the grass. Another really nice thing to provide outside are these outdoor carpets. They're comfortable on bare feet. They define an area. Little kids can play on them. In the wintertime, you can just roll them up and throw them in the garage, store them away. They're just very handy to have. Again, it's about function. How are you using that space? Are you walking barefoot? So outdoor carpets, another nice zero water way to provide a place where you can walk barefoot outside, and also define an area. So if you do want a lawn, and you're really just loving the grass, there are native alternatives that you can plant. And so Here's a screenshot of a company that provides a native sod blend. It's called Delta Bluegrass, and they are actually out in the Delta. They provide the native mow-free, so it's like really low maintenance, and then the native bent grass. A couple of different kinds of blends here, but they use about maybe a third as much water as a non-native blend. So really nice and versatile looking. It looks like a regular lawn, uses very little water. If you absolutely have to have that grass, this is a good alternative. You can also use native bunch grasses. Here's some examples in a friend's yard. She created this nice little divided area with some stepping stones. In these little awkward areas between the driveway and a sidewalk. You know, this looks like the mow-free over here. Or if you have to, you can use something that's not native. This is an elfin thyme. Pretty low water use. This is actually in my own home garden in the back. Makes a nice little kind of a carpet in between some stepping stones there. So something alternative to actually having a lawn. Some other alternatives. Now, if you're looking for just a broad swath of green that you don't need to mow, that uses almost no water, but still gives you that kind of that broad sweep, you're not necessarily walking there or having a party on top of it, you can do a ground cover. And their ground covers refer to plants that grow low and cover the ground. And one native plant that I really like to use is Ceanothus. And Ceanothus comes in a few different forms. A ground cover form, you can get them into a shrub form, and then some grow even more upright into sort of a small tree form. This one's a nice one, even though it's a specific example here. Ceanothus thyriflorus, Yankee Point, grows pretty rapidly to fill in a space, about 15 inches tall, has blue blossoms, sun, part shade, very low water use on this. So maybe about 1/10 as much as a regular lawn, but still gives you that nice swath of green and don't have to mow it, which is another awesome thing about a ground cover like this. Another ground cover alternative, and this one you actually can walk on. This is Achillea Milifolium. It's a native plant that we have here in California. It's semi-evergreen, so it kind of dies back a little bit, but not completely during the winter time. It spreads by runners. You can mow it. It flowers, so you can get these spikes of flowers, very meadow-like, in different colors, and pretty low water use. It likes a little bit more shade, but still pretty hardy, kind of hard to kill too. So a nice alternative to grasses. One that I like to use for a ground cover is our native strawberry. These things are pretty tasty. And, you know, instead of having these little tiny lawn areas, you can just, you know, pop in some nice evergreen strawberries here, tasty fruit here. Takes some sun, but it likes mostly shade. So lots of different things that we can use instead of grasses. Yet another one, Salvia Bee's Bliss. This is actually at the Primrose Way Garden. These Salvia Bee's Bliss sages, they're really vigorous. In the 6 years that they've been planted there, they've grown about 10 feet in diameter. It says 8 feet across in 2 years. These things will just keep going. They can probably cover an entire yard if you let them. So they're pretty vigorous. They look great most of the year. Later in the summer, they might look a little desiccated, but they're not dead. But they're pretty low water use. They have a blue blossom, very fragrant, easy to take care of. Really, the main issue with these is just keeping them from growing over walkways and sidewalks and driveways and whatnot. Another native ground cover alternative, this is Clinopodium de Glatii, evergreen. just kind of viney, very nice. Has a minty taste. You can actually make tea with it. Low and trailing, shade to some sun. So, you know, lots of alternatives to lawns. Okay, so you've decided, all right, I don't want decomposed granite. I don't want to use a rug. I want to change my lawn into a planted area. So where do I start finding plants? Now, if you're going for the rebate, I would say, you know, look at the list on the Alameda County's website to see what they have for getting money in return for buying those plants for your landscape. But if you want to research more native California plants, one database that's really great done by the California Native Plant Society is the calscape.org database. This has the list is 7,990 plants native to California. So you can search this database. They break it down into all plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, grasses, so on and so forth. They have a planting guide that kind of tells you, walks you through how to do the planting, tells you where you can get these plants, the native plant nurseries, where they're available. You can even create a plant list here with an Excel spreadsheet. And then butterflies. What's that about? Let's see, shall we? So here we go. What is it about? Remember I said that how ingestive behavior was related to landscape architecture and all this stuff? Well, so when we do these kinds of conversions to native plants, we have to really consider the function, again, of the plants. So it's not just the spaces that have function, but the plants also have function. And I'm going to just say it, plants are food. And so when deciding what to plant, and there's a reason for this, which I'll get to, a better question instead of what to plant is who to feed. So Calscape breaks down these plants into what larvae of butterflies and moths they feed. So that's super cool. You can raise butterflies in your yard if you plant what they like to eat. And they're very picky about what they eat. They won't eat just anything. And so they break down the 1,368 species of moths and butterflies in California, from everything from painted ladies to the buckeyes to the swallowtails, checker spots, of course, the monarchs and so on. So you're probably thinking, now, why isn't it really important to feed butterflies and moths? If you think about what a caterpillar is like, if you squish one, it's moist. Organisms store moisture in their bodies. So rain barrels are great. Organisms are better to store moisture. And we know that these plants are also very attractive to pollinators, that is bees. And bees have a great function in the environment, which is to spread genes around with the pollen so that they can spread plants around for the butterflies and moths to eat. So there's like a level of function that other things rely on here. And we know that with pollinators, with bees spreading the genes around, we have speciation occurring much more rapidly than you would if things were wind pollinated, wind just blowing pollen hither and wither everywhere without any sort of like specificity from one flower to the next. Okay. So what I'm telling you here is there's a superpower you can tap into, which is biology. Use biology to leverage the really optimal use of water, because we want to store water inside living organisms, and native plants are the way to get that whole thing started. And so when you're thinking about biology here and you're thinking, I just wanted to replace my lawn, this is the best way to do it, is to really consider the biology and the function and how it all works. And so those factors actually become more important than other factors like climate and geology and water in determining what to plant. Think about who you're feeding, because those things will store water and make it available to other things that live in the environment. And in Alameda County, there are 104 butterflies and moth species. So you can have all kinds of beauty fluttering past you in your yard if you plant these plants that they like to eat. We want to use those low water use plants though. How can you find out how much water a plant is using? Use the internet. There's this great resource called the Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. It's an online searchable database for plant factors of individual plant species published by the University of California, Cooperative Extension, and the California Department of Water Resources. And so what they do is they rank plants based as a percentage of a lawn. So a lawn is 100%. Remember that, using up 45% of the water budget outside. Everything else is based on that. So things that are very low water use are 0 to 10% of what a lawn would use. Low water species, 20 to 30%, and so on. So if you decide on some plants and you're like, how much water does it use? Look at the plant factor, which is basically a percentage of what a lawn would use. And that can also help you make a really good decision about low water use plants. Okay, so how do you lay out plants? And once you have that clean slate of the big yard full of mulch and cardboard, so just a few things about plant layout. Let's assume that you have a space here that's 12 feet by 12 feet. And what I tell people to do is use a piece of graph paper. You know, each square can equal 1 foot. So you'll have like a nice to scale drawing. If you let, maybe if it's a 1/4 inch square, it can be a 1/4 inch equals a foot. So what I like to do first, before I decide on any sort of plants, is figure out, you know, how I'm going to walk through that area. So function, consider paths for structure and for maintenance purposes, because you want to be able to get in there and weed and do things like that, prune and collect seeds or whatever. And then once you have a pathway drawn, I usually like to do my paths about 2 feet wide. Then you add your plants from your plant palette and draw those as circles at their mature diameter. Most circles should just touch, but can overlap for spacing purposes. You want to plant in masses. And then accent with larger trees and shrubs. Plant in odd numbers for massing purposes. And then the sequence of planting, start with trees first, then shrubs, then perennials, vines, bulbs, succulents, and then some annual plants. Don't forget to plan for plants underneath of tall trees and shrubs, so layer things. And so you can see, like, a pathway forms a nice line that you can create a nice line of plants, which can be very attractive. Big mass plant here, mass planting here, another mass planting here. When you do mass planting, and here's a designer secret, it has much more impact than just one of each, which kind of looks like a zoo. So a big swath of color and then bang, you know, like a contrasting color for accents. Just one of those designer tips that can really make things look really nice. And also the plants will, the roots will start talking to each other underground. And when they start doing that, then you start building a plant community, and they start to share resources and nutrients and water. So why do I go on and on about California native plants? California is a biodiversity hotspot. We are blessed here in California. We are one of about 30 or so biodiversity hotspots on the planet. We have almost 8,000 species of plants, some found almost nowhere else on the planet, more than any other state in the United States. Many of our species are drought tolerant. They've gotten used to no water during the summertime over millennia. And we also have about 1,600 species of native bees, more than any other state in the United States. Across the US, there are about 4,000 bee species. Honeybees are not native. We're not going to talk about those. But we have such a huge number of plant species because we have a large number of unique ecosystems in California and a large number of native bees. Remember, moving those genes around in different environments leads to an explosion of diversity. So we have deserts, we have redwood forests, we have coastal prairies, we have chaparral, we have grasslands. There's, a lot of different environments. And so by planting native, we can help those organisms that live in those places and help turn around some of those declines in insect species in places around the world that we see. So as I said before, plants are food. And as I like to say, plants are the beginning of everything. They are the primary producers of food and the basis of the food chain. So, people talk about the food chain. What is it really? Well, it starts with the sun, and you have energy from the sun coming down to the plants. The plants convert it into things for other organisms to eat. Remember, plants are food. So you have things like fat caterpillars, remember, bag of moisture, feeding on a juicy plant, another bag of moisture, that then is fed to other organisms. So that's how the sun's energy comes down and gets passed up into the food chain. And, insects then provide food for other animals like baby birds. 37% of animal species are plant-eating insects. And as a rule, and this is really important, this is why California native plants, native insects only eat the native plants they evolved with. They're very picky eaters. And pollinators, the bees, have a key role in helping other animals access the sun's energy by helping to spread that genetic diversity of plants in the environment. So again, we're replacing our lawn, but we're taking it to the next level by really leveraging the power of biology. And okay, plants are beautiful. We've got pink flowers, we've got fluffy petals, we've got bright yellows and blues and purples, but they're really not decorations, at least not to the insects. They're food. That means when you plant native, you will attract many native pollinators and other insects, and then in turn, birds. And I tell people, you will be amazed at just the transformation into like a mini wildlife sanctuary your yard can become by planting native. They're just so critical in sustaining life. So you don't have to be sad about removing your lawn. Think of it as an opportunity to leverage that biology. So why is it so important to see native plants as food? The plants, because they're food, they will attract a variety of native pollinators and other insects. So it's best to avoid making your garden an ecological trap. You don't want to invite all these beautiful creatures to your yard and then have them not be able to complete their life cycle. Okay, it's like inviting a bunch of people over for a dinner party and then killing them before dessert. Want to avoid that. So an ecological trap then is something in the environment that attracts those organisms like the plants, and because of that attraction makes it easier for them to be killed through predation or other means. So there might be something in your yard that will make them more exposed to predators, and we can talk about how to avoid those things, because you will have beautiful creatures like these butterflies or these beautiful bumblebees, just a couple of beautiful creatures that guaranteed you will have them. So putting that aside for a moment. So remember I talked about massing of plants and layering of things underneath trees and shrubs. Why do we want to do that? Remember, when we replace our lawns, which is basically one species of things, one layer thick, we can do so much better than that, okay? And not only can we do better, but we can have a bigger effect upon the environment by removing our lawn. It's not just about reducing water, but it's kind of like, how can we create something that's actually even better for the environment than just removing the lawn and planting plants? So we want to do something where we increase the connectivity between what we plant. And the more connectivity and complexity, the more the plants will support each other, okay, leading to reduced irrigation needs. And it's counterintuitive. Less water doesn't necessarily mean less plants, unless you have, like decomposed granite or a rug. What I have found is that the more that you add plants, you're building a community of plants and other organisms that support each other, and they share water, nutrients, and information. So if you imagine a machine where you're adding the right parts, in this case, the plants, you're basically putting together the self-assembling living machine. And a goal is kind of to start with 20 native plant species that are local to your area. And so here I've done a little sketch here of kind of how I visualize how these things work. So let's say you create a little swale in your yard, a low place for water to collect. This becomes prime real estate. You can plant in a swale. The moisture will go down into the groundwater and then get sucked up by tap roots of trees that have tap roots. That's why we want to keep those trees well watered during the drought, because they also, trees have these surface roots that will then distribute water to all the other plants. And all the roots get connected in there, and they say, something good is happening. The big tree is sucking up some water and getting ready to share. And we can also save moisture in the environment by having twigs and leaves in a pile. What we find is that the roots of plants will grow towards piles of leaves because that's where the water is. Roots want to go where the water is. And you can trap moisture underneath of rocks, boulders. I can't tell you how many times I've seen trees growing right next to a boulder, because underneath that boulder is a cool, shady, moist area. So lots of different ways to increase complexity in the environment. But what do we mean by a plant community? And this is from the Vegetation Glossary at the California Native Plant Society website. It's a group of plant species living together and linked together by their effects on one another and their responses to the environment they share. Typically, the plant species co-occur in a plant community and show a definite association or affinity with each other. Plant things that grow together normally, because they will all play well with each other. It's like, let's say you have redwood trees in your yard. Instead of having, I don't know, ivy underneath of it, why not something like ferns and other things that grow underneath redwood trees naturally? And you'll find that everybody's happier because it's a community that they are familiar with. And plants, we don't think of plants as social creatures, but they are actually social. We just don't communicate the same way that they do. So in California, we have lots of plant communities. We have coastal scrub areas, coastal prairies, oak chaparral, deserts, redwood forest, and so forth. And those plant communities are a function of the pollinators that live in them. So bees are those farmers whose function in the environment is to spread the genetic diversity of plants for other insects to eat. So the pollinators are moving those genes around. So you want to aim for, in your garden, to be a majority of native plants to be local species. So things that grow in your area, and you can actually search on the CalScape site for your county. So that tells you what grows in the county. And then that gives you kind of the appropriate plant community. And here's a great shot of the very northern tip of the Point Reyes seashore. It's a great walk up here. You've got beautiful coastal poppies, lupins, the cobweb thistle, Cirsium occidentale, which is a beautiful plant, prickly, but boy, do the bees love it. It's really amazing. So again, pollen is basically the male genes of plants that gets moved around by bees, spreading that DNA. And here's a beautiful picture of one of our bumblebees that we have here in the Bay Area, the yellow-faced bumblebee, collecting pollen. And she's moving it around, and she's on this beautiful plant, coyote mint, which has a beautiful purple flower on it. Really super easy to grow, super low water use, really just super easy plant. Okay, so if we're going to do plants, and we're not just going to spread mulch and leave it, or spread decomposed granite and leave it, we're going to plant things. Again, the sequence. Start with your large plants first. People say, I don't know where to start. Big stuff, trees, then shrubs, then perennials. You want to try to fit in as many trees as possible. Then your shrub layer, you know, try to get it to be about 60% or more of your landscape. Focus on evergreen shrubs, those ones that don't drop all their leaves all the time. And then in the remaining spaces, fit in as many grasses, perennials, bulbs, and succulent over time as you can. So you don't have to do it all at once. Start with your big trees first. Even if you just like got rid of an area of lawn, pop in a tree, that's a good place to start. And don't forget annuals. You know, annuals, if you want some instant color and you're feeling depressed in the spring after a long winter, there's nothing better than a big swath of annuals. And many of them, like these tidy tips here, will reseed themselves year after year. So basically you can spread those one year and they'll keep coming back. So start with your keystone trees first. And what do we mean by keystone? So keystone plant genera are those plants that form the backbone of the habitat of resources, food, shelter, nesting sites. So these are kind of like the main engine in the big machine. They help other plant species to survive, and they provide food for up to dozens or hundreds of types of caterpillar species, upon which countless other things depend. So if you provide if you provide support for a large number of other organisms, those keystone species provide a critical connection in the environment. People say, well, how do you make complexity? You make complexity by having a keystone species then that has all these different resources. Think of the keystone species here being my fist, and each of my fingers being like strands of a web that connects these to other organisms, so that it becomes part of a fabric of the environment, that even if you lose one or two of the threads, you still have other ones to hold things together. It becomes much more resilient that way. So the takeaway technique, remember, we're not just getting rid of our lawns here, we're really leveraging the power of biology. And so include at least a few keystone plants to provide a resilient native plant garden. And in Alameda County, there are 15 tree species, so lots to choose from. We like trees because trees help save water. Remember, we're storing water inside organisms. This is really one of the best places for water, because water is life, and water inside of life makes it available to other things. And so oaks are great. Here we have the coast live oak here, Quercus agrifolia. Not a great choice for everybody's backyard. Here's my husband, he's 6'3" tall. So maybe a little too big for the residential site, but you could go with something smaller like a scrub oak, and you can still get those great connections. We know that trees absorb water and release it into the air, cooling it and cleaning it. Okay, so great for the atmosphere. So where the lawn wasn't really helping with that, we can really have trees helping with that. Trees are forming half of the rain cycle. So it teams up with the oceans where the water is evaporating off, forming clouds and going over the mountains and dropping the water like we learned in school. That's half. The other half is the water that trees release from their leaves. They improve water quality by filtering rainwater, slowing down impacts of heavy rain. So they're reducing flooding, stabilizing the soil. So tree planting, if you don't know where to start, plant a few trees. That's probably the easiest place to start if you're looking to replace your lawn with a garden. We know that clouds form more often over forested areas than that are non-forested. And even those trees that drop their leaves during the wintertime, the cooling effects of the clouds and the carbon dioxide capture of those trees more than offset the reflection of the sun during times when the deciduous trees are bare. So even if they lose their leaves, they're still providing a net benefit for the environment. You know, oaks are really great. No other trees come close to providing all the ecosystem services that oaks provide. Here in the Santa Clara Valley, the valley oak, the Quercus lobata, used to be 61% of the tree cover in the valley. Now it's 1%. They're a keystone species. They're deciduous. They drop their leaves every year. And those leaves are ecosystem gold. You want to leave those underneath the tree to support the health of the tree, which is less work for you. Those tap roots will seek out the water table, and then those lateral surface roots share the water with other plants. You can plant native plants underneath of the oaks, and native plants underneath oaks are better for the tree. And these trees are insect factories, converting that sunlight to tasty leaves for so many things to eat. And people think, oh, an oak is really slow, but actually oaks grow really quickly. And here's a picture of the Hopkins Avenue pollinator garden. This valley oak here is the anchor plant in this garden, which is just teeming with life. And an oak can live 600 years. So, you know, you can not have to plant one for your entire life if you plant just one. But you might be saying, okay, Juanita, I want to plant some trees. What can I fit into my own yard? And so here I have pictures and a list of all the trees that I planted in my dinky, 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 tiny, itsy bitsy tiny yard. And I cram a lot of plants into my yard. Everything from the big leaf maple to one of my favorites, the mountain mahogany, which is a beautiful evergreen tree. I even planted a willow, which I hand water once a week, which is plenty. The elderberry, which is a great plant. The holly leaf cherry, which is evergreen, a great low water use plant. I have Acer negundo, the box elder, which I hand water because it likes to be a little bit more moist. The Modesto ash, which was a street tree, which was already there. The hazelnut, so if you guys like filberts or hazelnuts, you know, this is a good one. It's deciduous, and you have to plant a male and a female, but really great plant. You can plant Prunus virginiana, which is the choke cherry, Arctostaphylos, the big berry manzanita, red buds, and then the toyon. Seriously, I have all of these in my yard, and I don't just have one of each. I think I have like 5 mountain mahoganies. So if I can fit these in my yard, you guys can fit them in your yards. They're wonderful plants. Then once you're done figuring out your trees, go to your evergreen shrubs that don't go dormant, you know, or lose their leaves. If you have about 75% or so of nice evergreen shrubs, your yard's going to look nice and green all year round. And in Alameda County, there are 46 shrubs that are native. And I like to do a search at CalScape and then rank by the number of butterflies and moths hosted. So the more you feed, the higher keystone rating that plant has. So the more connections it will have to the environment. But choose what will fit for your location and your water needs. And if you don't see something that you like, expand your search area a little bit to really find what you like. Maintenance. once you planted it up, how do you take care of it? Native gardens are less maintenance than a non-native garden with a lawn. Basically, a native plant garden is kind of like a machine that runs itself. Most of my work in my gardens that I have, and I've got a lot of them, and I'm really always trying to minimize my work, is keeping the weeds at bay, pulling them out by hand. We irrigate to establish the plants about once a week. And how we irrigate is we encourage those roots to search for water, because remember what I said, roots will look for water. So just outside of the root ball, so that the roots will grow looking for it, prune very sparingly to control dried up dead material for fire safety. You don't have to fertilize. I amend very sparingly. You want to mulch to control weeds initially and help to establish the plants. Then you can mulch with leaves. Remember, leaves are ecosystem gold. And if you think the leaves look messy, you can put like 1 chip thick bark mulch on the top, and it will look nice and clean and tidy. You can leave a few areas of bare dirt for nests for bees. 70% of our native bees nest underground. Don't use leaf blowers in planted areas. Leave your leaves in place, because those leaves are going to stay nice and moist and keep the ground nice and cool and trap moisture in your yard, and also be a place where larvae hang out as pupa before they hatch. A lot of things will eat leaves and then drop down into the ground right underneath those plants. So you don't want to be blowing away the leaf litter or your mulch under there, because you're essentially creating a trap there with that leaf blower, because you're killing everything that was eating earlier. If you do use a leaf blower, use an electrically powered blower that reduces fumes and emissions, and don't use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. And really, my method of gardening is really hands-off, except for weeding. And even then, I'm not always on top of it. I kind of let the nature show me what she wants to, where she wants to be, and where plants want to be happiest. So, in terms of being a native plant gardener and really leveraging the power of biology to trap moisture in our landscapes when we're going the garden route, is to then optimize the reproductive success of organisms, because they're going to continue to recycle moisture through successive generations. And with the native plant gardens, those abundant blooms with nectar and pollen and host plants for butterfly and moth larvae will be very attractive to those insects. And so you want to avoid things in the environment that is unfit to maintain them. So we try to connect our habitats to reduce isolation, and we try to reduce light pollution at night. So, a trap would be an open window letting light out into your yard at night, and attracting moths like this one here that was right outside our bathroom window, until we hung blackout curtains in all those windows. So we don't let a lot of light pollution outside at night, and to use motion sensors on other outdoor lighting instead of leaving the lights on. You can also use yellow light bulbs. Insects are not as attracted to that. Leave your leaves underneath shrubs. And if you eliminate the use of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides, we have 70% of our native bees nesting in the ground. And so if those chemicals get into the ground, it may affect their development through the larval stages. And then reducing as much gasoline exhaust as possible, because insects orient using odor and fragrance, amongst other things. So you want to reduce the fumes of things that might interfere with that behavior. So just be mindful that when you're replacing your lawn, and you're actually replacing it with something way better, depending on the function that you want. Remember, broad concepts here. it's not just enough to plant native plants, but to really see them in their functional context. So, again, broad concepts that you can then use to carefully optimize the moisture in your yard and use actually less of it, less water. Once you do all that, some of the final thoughts, remember all these broad concepts, you build something that is remarkable. So it's not like, oh, we're moving the lawn, it's going to look, oh no. When you start planting in, if you go the plant route, you have these ecosystem services that these plants are providing. And with these plants, they're going to save you money on water because they're only going to use a fraction of the water that a lawn uses. You're not going to be spending a lot of money on the mower guys coming and blowing things and mowing your lawn once a week or something. So you're not just saving money, and you're saving water, time, but the benefit, the real bonus that you get is you start to see these interrelationships in nature, and you can optimize the productivity of these plants. And this will lead to an abundance of life that you see, as well as enhancing your appreciation and your role in caring for nature's complex beauty. And with those final thoughts, I will be happy to answer some questions if anybody has some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Juanita, for your incredible presentation and all that wonderful information and knowledge. I love the approach of viewing your landscape, your yard as, a living, breathing community, which it is, and kind of taking that approach to when you're, determining what you want, like your yard to be and look like, and like you mentioned, what is its function truly. So that's awesome. All right, yeah, now we have some time for questions. We do have a couple of questions that our attendees have put into the Q&A box, so I'll just read them out to you. Let's see. So Julie asks, what about weeds coming up through the sheet mulching? So maybe if you could provide tips for how to deal with that.
Yes. Well, their weeds are very determined creatures. I see them coming up through AstroTurf, which always makes me a little sad. And so when you're putting layers of cardboard down, and some people use like 6 layers of cardboard and several inches of mulch and compost, those plants have to grow up through it. So they're going to be kind of weak when you pull them out. So they're not going to be really super strongly rooted. So they're actually pretty easy to pull out. And I don't like to let weeds go to seed. When they're blooming, that's a great time to yank them before they can set any seeds. And you just kind of nip it in the bud, literally, and get them out before they can, one weed might have, 500 seeds on it. So best to get it before it can spread its genetic trauma everywhere. Is something for you to weed next season. So, and the spring really is the main weeding time because things sprout with moisture. And so it might seem like it's like a never-ending task, but as things get drier over the year, the course of the year, then the weeding should go down.
Great, thanks for those tips. All right, so next question also related to weeds. Let's see, the question is, in our area, weeds grow through anything, including thick mulch and rocks. So how do you propose we minimize weeds in things like succulent gardens and drought-tolerant landscapes? Should we use a weed barrier?
I do not recommend weed barriers because, if you want to have, the organisms that are using these gardens. And if you're using native plants, you are going to have, you're going to have native bees. It's just, you're putting out a buffet, they're going to come. And so with a weed barrier, they can't actually get through it to get to their nest underground. So I don't recommend a weed barrier. We don't use weed barriers in our gardens. You know, I try a variety of things, and we have some pretty obnoxious weeds in our gardens. You know, we have the non-native arum root, which that stuff is really hard to deal with. And I've tried putting big pavers on top of them, and they'll like grow sideways and then come up. But that makes them weak. And so then you can pull the stone back and then dig them out. So the more challenging ones, it's like, okay, you want to live, I'm going to make you work for it. And so so that weakens them, and it makes it easier to deal with them. So something that's really obnoxious like that, and plus it keeps that soil moist under there, so when you go to tackle those things, and I have some very specific tools that I like to use. There's one called the hori, which is like a knife. There's a nice pointed sharp end that you can really go to town and get those things out. So something like arum root, you know, that's one thing I use. Another obnoxious weed that we have is the non-native onion weed or garlic weed, people call it. And these things are really hard to get rid of because they have little bulbs. And so basically what I do is I pick off all the flower heads as they're getting ready to bloom. And then towards the end of the season, I'll let them wither down a little bit, and then I'll use the hori to dig them out. And I just stay on top of it because I will win, maybe not in 1 year, but you know, it's not a one and done thing. You just have to keep coming back, because even if you weed everything out, no weeds left, things will blow in, you know, on the wind or somebody's fur or shoelaces, or, you know, nature finds a way to introduce weeds. And I often find too that weeds will come in at edges of things. And so whenever I weed, I try to start from the outside in, unless something is actually growing around a plant. So I'll also weed around plants. So from the edges and the areas surrounding a plant. And if I really want to be specific about weeding, I actually have bonsai tweezers that I use to carefully remove things, like another noxious weed, oxalis, which spreads by little runners and drops down roots where all those runners are. And so I use the tweezers to kind of tease it out of the ground and then tease it back to the very root and yank it out before they can set seed. A multi-pronged approach to winning the war.
Yeah, thanks for those tips and those words of encouragement. You just gotta stay as resilient as the weeds are.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So next question from Ellie. Doesn't the arroyo willow have invasive roots?
Yes, they can be invasive. So you have to be very careful where you want to put them. I would not suggest putting them next to any kind of sewer pipes or an irrigation pipe, or anything that you want those roots to grow into that might be moist. Otherwise, I'm not really worried about it. It's in a bed next to my driveway. That's not close to any of those things. So you just have to be careful about where you might want to put it, kind of like, you know, a non-native fig tree, which will definitely get into things. But, you know, they'll go to where the moisture is. So something to keep in mind.
Thank you. All right. Next question is, how should we prepare the soil for both succulents and other drought-tolerant plants? Succulents typically prefer sandy, well-draining soil.
Yes. So depending on how heavy your soil is, you may want to use a cactus mix to kind of loosen the soil up. Some people actually work in a little decomposed granite into the soil mixes and into the planting hole. You know, always like dig your planting hole a couple of times the size of the pot. And I always plant the smallest thing that I can possibly plant, like the 4-inch pot, if I can get it, because it's much easier to dig, you know, an 8-inch hole versus an 18-inch hole. So these are things that you can do. I know that I said you don't have to amend a lot, and you really don't, unless your soil is like really heavy. You know, if it's so heavy and so clayey, you may have to maybe even create like a mounded area for drainage for succulents or things that don't like to have their feet wet necessarily. And then, you know, and work in that kind of situation.
Thank you. All right, folks, keep putting your questions in if you have any as we're nearing the end of our workshop. But we do have one more question. Just asking if you know of any good drip irrigation companies in Southern California.
In Southern California, I do not.
All righty. So that was the last question that we had in our Q&A box and our chat box. Feel free to type up any last questions real quick as we're wrapping up here. But just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today for our first spring landscape workshop of this year. Thank you to our wonderful instructor, Juanita, for joining us as well and sharing all her knowledge and expertise and tips. I'm sure everyone who attended today learned something new. I for sure did. And I hope you all, you know, take this information and use it as you work on your landscape conversion projects. We did have one more question come in, or a couple more questions come in as I did that spiel. Awesome. Let's see. Thoughts on the deciduous shade tree. I'm not going to be able to pronounce this right. Platanus racemosa.
Oh, yes. Platanus racemosa.
All right.
It's fine. You know, they are planted quite a lot. I do think it is one of the larval food sources for the swallowtail, I think. It's a nice plant. You know, it gets big.
Okay, thank you for your comments on that one. One more question. Can you recommend any good succulent landscape designers for the East Bay area?
So, you know, I'm going to give a shout out to a friend of mine who has the East Bay Wilds Nursery in Oakland, Pete Vayu. I know that he does design and installation, and he is a real expert at all things native. I don't know if I do know that he has succulents, and he would probably work for that kind of design, but that he's somebody that you could reach out to. And he's one of the nurseries that's listed on the Cowscape site. And if you haven't been to his nursery, it's a real treat to go there because it's like a little oasis where he is. It's just a lot of bird life there. One time when I went there, and this is just a testament to the power of these plants. He had hummingbirds nesting in his nursery in the middle of this urban area. It was fantastic. So, you know, proof of concept right there.
Wow, that's incredible. All right, let's see. We got another question come in. The question says, I have a couple of elderberry trees that grew by itself, but my neighbor says they're giant weeds and I should get rid of them. Do you think they're weeds or not?
Oh, that's a terrible thing to say. They are not weeds. The things that are weeds are non-native plants that are ecological dead ends. That's what I would tell them. And that these, arm yourself with the knowledge of the butterflies that these plants create and the moths, and the bird life that they support. And, ask your neighbor if they can do better than that. Okay, what can you suggest that will feed baby birds? And throw down the gauntlet, and challenge them to come up with a better native plant.
Thank you for that answer. I don't see any more questions coming in yet. I did just want to share you that, we got some comments from our attendees saying this was a wonderful webinar, and I agree. So again, thank you for being with us this evening and sharing all this wonderful information, very important information. We all appreciate your time and your expertise, and just want to say thank you to our attendees again for joining us, and we hope you can join us again for our second landscape workshop that'll be coming up. And yeah, I don't see any more questions coming in, so we can wrap up. We're close to time as well, and we'll make sure to send out the recording as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.